The legend of Rani Lakshmibai. The winter sun of Varanasi warmed the Ghats softly on the day a young girl named Manikarnika was born to Morapantambe and Bhagirathi Bai. No one could have imagined that this child, who giggled freely and played fearlessly along the riverbanks, would one day stand as one of India's greatest symbols of courage. Even in her earliest years, locals recalled how she never feared climbing the large stone steps of the Ghats or jumping across narrow terraces. She was small, bright-eyed, and quick, always curious, always watching the world with an intensity far beyond her age. Her father worked in the court of the Peshwa in Bithor, and soon the family moved there. It was in Bithor that Manikarnika, known affectionately as Manu, grew into a young girl whose spirit was unrestrained by traditional expectations. The Peshwa, Baji Rao II, took immediate liking to her. She would accompany his adopted sons to the training grounds where they practiced swordsmanship, horseback riding, and archery. At first, the soldiers laughed, seeing a thin, small girl with playful braids attempt to mimic their moves. But day after day she practiced, often in the scorching heat, often well after the boys had left. Soon the laughter disappeared, replaced by admiration. Manu was quick, agile, and sharper than many trained boys her age. It was the early 19th century, a time when the East India Company was tightening its grip across India. Where once independent kingdoms ruled, British residents now walked freely through royal courts, influencing decisions and manipulating succession lines. But Bithor was still a warm, vibrant place for the young Manu, who had not yet felt the political storms brewing across the land. Her life changed forever at the age of 14 when she married the Maharaja of Jhansi, Gangadhar Rao. With marriage came a new name, Lakshmibai, and the responsibility of ruling a kingdom far bigger than anything she had ever imagined. The people of Jhansi welcomed their new queen warmly. She was young, yes, but there was a spark in her that the older advisors recognized. She was intelligent, observant, and unafraid to ask questions. While other queens stayed within palace walls, Lakshmibai frequently rode out on horseback through Jhansi's bustling markets and quiet outskirts, understanding her people, their fears, their needs. But fate was not kind. The couple's infant son died soon after birth. Grief struck the palace like a monsoon storm. To secure the future of Jhansi, the Maharaja adopted a child, Damodar Rao. However, not long after the adoption ceremony, the Maharaja himself fell ill. On his deathbed, he entrusted Lakshmibai with the protection of Jhansi and their adopted son. Soon after his passing, the British invoked the Doctrine of Lapse, a policy stating that if a king died without a biological heir, his kingdom would be annexed. They rejected the adopted prince and informed Lakshmibai that Jhansi would now belong to the East India Company. She responded with one of the most iconic declarations in Indian history, "Main apni Jhansi nahi dungi." I will not give up my Jhansi. The British assumed her resistance was symbolic. They believed she would eventually surrender authority as many princely states had done before. But Lakshmibai was not like other rulers. She strengthened Jhansi's military, reopened arms production units, trained women in combat, and built an atmosphere of unity among her subjects. Her palace courtyard became a ground where young girls learned to wield swords. Old warriors, long retired, returned to teach strategies of warfare. When the Revolt of 1857 erupted, sparks of rebellion flashed across northern India. Sepoys rose against British officers, and civilians marched alongside warriors demanding freedom. Jhansi became a critical center of the uprising, but Lakshmibai's position was delicate. She wanted to protect her people from unnecessary bloodshed while ensuring that Jhansi remained free from British control. In early 1858, British troops marched towards Jhansi with a clear directive: capture the queen and take the city at any cost. The siege began brutally. Cannons thundered against Jhansi's fort walls. The ground trembled. Smoke swallowed the sky. Yet from within the fort, Lakshmibai led with a calm that inspired thousands. She stood atop the ramparts, fully armored, guiding her troops. She moved across the battlefield with astonishing speed. Some soldiers swore she appeared in two places at once. Her horse Badal leapt across barricades as she coordinated attacks and ensured food supplies were distributed to civilians. When the British breached one section of the fort, Lakshmibai made a desperate but daring decision. to escape with her young son and continue fighting from outside Jhansi. In the dead of night, with flames lighting the sky, and enemy cannon fire echoing relentlessly, she strapped Damodar to her back, mounted her horse, and leapt from the fort's ramparts. It was a jump that many thought impossible, but she made it. She escaped. What followed was a legendary journey across central India. Lakshmibai joined forces with Tatya Tope and other rebel leaders. Together, they captured the fortress of Gwalior, a major strategic victory that terrified the British. But the British were relentless. General Hugh Rose led an army determined to end the rebellion once and for all. The battles that followed were ferocious. Lakshmibai fought at the front, refusing to retreat. She inspired her soldiers by her mere presence. Her courage seemed to erase fear itself. It was during one such fierce clash near the Gwalior cantonment that Lakshmibai met her end. Surrounded by enemy soldiers, she fought until her sword shattered. Even then, she resisted fiercely. Historical accounts differ slightly, but most agree on one thing: she died as she had lived, with unmatched bravery, refusing to be captured. Loyal supporters quickly carried her body away and cremated her, so the British could never claim her as a trophy. Word of. Generations after her passing, the memory of Rani Lakshmibai continued to live in the hearts of the people of India. Stories of the young queen who rode into battle with her child tied to her back were whispered in homes, sung by wandering bards, and taught to young girls who admired her courage. But the legend of Lakshmibai was not built merely from the battles she fought. It was built from the life she lived, the resilience she embodied, and the inspiration she left behind. To truly understand her impact, we must look beyond the war fields and into the quieter, lesser-known moments that shaped her journey. When Lakshmibai had first arrived in Jhansi as a young bride, she found herself in a kingdom that was far from perfect. Years of drought had weakened its agricultural base, and political uncertainty made the trade routes unstable. Many rulers saw such challenges as obstacles, but Lakshmibai saw them as opportunities. She persuaded the Maharaja to invest in irrigation projects that would help farmers rely less on monsoon rains. Canals were repaired, wells were dug, and farmland that had once dried under harsh summers slowly began to thrive again. This not only strengthened Jhansi's economy, but also won Lakshmibai the love of her people, long before she ever stepped onto a battlefield. She also spent time in the Darbar Hall, learning from the court's scribes and advisors. She understood revenue laws, taxation processes, and the complex relationships between neighboring kingdoms. While many young queens might have left such tasks to their husbands, Lakshmibai believed that a ruler must understand every thread that holds a kingdom together. She often stayed up late into the night, reviewing lists of farmer complaints, merchant petitions, or matters related to security. Her compassion was as strong as her ambition. When a group of widows from a nearby village came seeking help because the local landlord had seized their property, Lakshmibai intervened immediately, even against the advice of senior ministers. She rode to the village herself, confronted the landlord, and returned the property to the widows. It was the first time people saw how fiercely she was willing to fight for justice. Even after she became queen, she continued her practice of horseback riding at dawn. She would gallop through the palace grounds, her long braid flying behind her, the sound of hooves echoing across the morning air. Warriors trained in the art of warfare were surprised by how skilled she was. She could ride bareback, execute sharp turns, and even fire arrows while the horse was in full motion. Over time, she trained not just herself, but also a group of young women who admired her courage. These women would later form an important part of her defensive forces when the British attacked Jhansi. As her reputation grew, so did the tensions with British officers posted in nearby regions. They were unsettled by her confidence and her independence. A young queen who took bold decisions, trained women in combat, and interfered in matters of governance was unusual in their eyes. They preferred rulers who remained politically weak, pliable, and dependent on British advice. Lakshmibai was none of these things. This made the British increasingly wary of her. When the Maharaja fell ill, Lakshmibai did everything she could to manage the functioning of the state. Physicians from distant regions were called, prayers were offered in temples, and medicinal concoctions were prepared according to ancient practices. But fate could not be changed. The news of the Maharaja's death left the entire kingdom in mourning. Yet Lakshmibai had no time to grieve. The British made their intentions clear within weeks. They rejected the adoption of Damodar Rao as heir and declared that Jhansi would be annexed. In the months that followed, Lakshmibai's defiance grew sharper. She wrote letters to British officials explaining why the doctrine of lapse should not apply to Jhansi. She argued with legal precision, pointing out historical precedents where adopted sons had inherited kingdoms. Her letters reflected not just emotion, but intelligence. But the East India Company was determined. They wanted Jhansi, not only for its fertile lands, but also for its strategic location. Meanwhile, discontent across India was rising. Indian soldiers in the British Army were increasingly frustrated with discriminatory treatment, harsh punishments, and cultural insensitivity. When the spark of rebellion erupted in 1857, it spread faster than anyone expected. Sepoys rose in Meerut, Delhi, Kanpur, and parts of Awadh. The rebellion was not a single movement, but a collection of local uprisings fueled by years of resentment. Jhansi was thrust into this storm. When rebels seized the city and killed British residents, Lakshmibai took control to prevent further chaos. She set up a temporary administration, protected surviving civilians, and wrote to British officials clarifying that she had no role in the uprising. But her explanations were ignored. The British saw an opportunity to paint her as a rebel leader and justify the annexation of Jhansi. By 1858, when General Hugh Rose marched toward Jhansi, the Queen was prepared. She had studied maps, designed defensive strategies, and held meetings with experienced warriors. Under her command, Jhansi's fort became a fortress of hope. People from nearby villages fled to the city seeking protection, and she ensured that food, water, and shelter were provided as best as possible. The British siege was brutal. Day after day, cannonballs exploded against the fort's walls. Dust and smoke filled the air. Children cried in fear and the elderly prayed for safety. But Lakshmibai never let despair take root. She walked among her people comforting them, assuring them that Jhansi would stand strong. When her soldiers were exhausted, she motivated them by fighting alongside them. When food became scarce, she reduced her own portions before allowing rations for others to be reduced. The story of her escape from Jhansi, leaping from the fort with her son tied behind her, became legendary. But the journey that followed was even more extraordinary. She and her loyal companions rode across rugged terrain, hiding in forests, crossing rivers, and outmaneuvering British patrols. Villagers along the way welcomed her with tears in their eyes, offering shelter even when they knew it was dangerous. For them, Lakshmibai was not just a queen. She was a symbol of resistance, an embodiment of their dreams for freedom. When she reached Kalpi, she joined forces with Tatya Tope and other rebel commanders. Together, they attempted to build a united front. They trained troops, gathered weapons, and strengthened defenses. Lakshmibai was always at the center of strategy discussions. Her tactical insights impressed even seasoned warriors. She had an exceptional ability to anticipate British movements and adapt quickly. Yet the odds were heavily against them. The British forces were well-equipped, disciplined, and determined to crush the rebellion entirely. Despite this, Lakshmibai fought tirelessly. She led assaults, supervised training, and even took charge of reorganizing supply chains. Her presence alone gave hope to thousands of fighters who felt that as long as she lived, the flame of the rebellion would never die. When Kalpi fell, Lakshmibai, Tatya Tope, and their soldiers retreated to Gwalior. There they captured the fort and declared it a stronghold of freedom. For a brief moment, it seemed the tide might turn. The flag of rebellion flew proudly from the fort's highest tower, but the British moved swiftly and attacked with overwhelming force. Lakshmibai fought her final battle with unmatched ferocity. Witnesses later recalled that she moved like lightning across the battlefield, defending her position with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. Even when she was mortally wounded, she refused to surrender. She died fighting for the land she loved. Her followers cremated her quickly so the British could not claim her body. Even the British acknowledged her greatness. General Hugh Rose wrote, "She was the most dangerous of all the Indian leaders." But her story did not end with her death. In fact, it truly began there. What Lakshmibai left behind was more than a memory. It was a movement. News of her final stand spread like the monsoon wind, touching every corner of India. Villagers repeated the tale of the queen, who tied her son to her back and rode into battle. Soldiers whispered her name before charging into combat. Even elderly men in distant provinces shed tears when they learned how bravely she had died, refusing to bow to a foreign power until her last breath. The British thought eliminating Lakshmibai would weaken the rebellion, but instead the opposite happened. Her courage ignited a new fire within people who had once lived under fear. Across central India, her followers refused to surrender. Some fought in her name, while others sang songs praising her valor. Mothers told their children stories of how a young girl from Varanasi grew into a warrior who challenged the most powerful empire in the world. It was said that even British soldiers, hardened by years of colonial warfare, spoke of her with a mix of respect and wariness, acknowledging that they had faced someone truly extraordinary. Lakshmibai's closest allies continued her struggle. Tatya Tope, her most trusted friend and fellow commander, refused to surrender even when outnumbered. For months, he led guerrilla attacks on British camps. Inspired by the promise he had made to Lakshmibai that he would continue fighting for India. Though he was eventually captured and executed, the British recognized that his unbreakable spirit had been shaped by the Queen of Jhansi herself. But resistance wasn't limited to battlefields alone. In cities, ordinary citizens protested unfair taxes. In villages, farmers refused to hand over crops to British officers. Everywhere, people found small ways to resist, each act a tribute to the Queen, who had shown them that fear was merely an illusion. Even in faraway Bengal, where news traveled slowly, intellectuals wrote essays praising Lakshmibai's bravery, calling her the embodiment of India's rising voice. The British, realizing how powerful her legacy had become, attempted to control the narrative. They released official reports depicting her as a rebellious ruler who caused unnecessary destruction. But people refused to believe these claims. They had witnessed her compassion, her dedication, and her sacrifice for them. No document, no matter how forcefully written, could erase the truth that lived in their hearts. In fact, the British attempts to defame her only strengthened her legend. Years passed, but the memory of Lakshmibai did not fade. When freedom fighters of the 20th century, like Subhas Chandra Bose, Lala Lajpat Rai, Ram Prasad Bismil, and Sarojini Naidu, rose against the British Raj, they often referenced her. Bose famously named one of his regiments the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, composed entirely of women, in tribute to the warrior queen who proved that bravery was not confined to men. But long before she became a national icon, Lakshmibai had been a young girl with dreams, fears, and hopes like anyone else. To understand her story fully, we must go back to moments that shaped the woman behind the legend. One such moment occurred during her early teens in Bithor. She had been practicing sword fighting under the guidance of a Maratha commander. At first, she struggled with balance, often losing her footing while attempting difficult moves. Her instructor advised her to rest, suggesting she might never be able to master certain techniques. But Manu was determined. She would stand alone on the training ground after everyone left, repeating the same moves again and again until they became second nature. This persistence, this refusal to give up, defined her entire life. She also had a deep love for literature. The palace library became her sanctuary. She read ancient Indian texts, stories of warrior queens, and historical accounts of empires that rose and fell. These stories shaped her understanding of leadership. She learned that a true leader is not someone who commands from comfort, but someone who stands with her people, sharing both joy and suffering. When she became queen, she carried these values with her. The people of Jhansi recall how she walked through narrow alleys during festivals, blessing newborns, speaking gently to elderly women, and ensuring merchants weren't being overtaxed. She encouraged education for girls and welcomed scholars into the palace, supporting their work. The kingdom prospered under her influence, not because she demanded loyalty, but because she earned it. During the British siege, when food supplies dwindled, she organized community kitchens in the fort. She insisted on eating only after the children and elderly were fed. She took the time to sit with families who had lost loved ones, quietly promising that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. While leading armies and planning strategies, she also remained deeply human, deeply connected to the very people she fought for. One story often shared by eyewitnesses spoke of a young soldier who panicked amid heavy cannon fire. Trembling, he attempted to flee, fearing he would not survive. Lakshmibai spotted him, rode up to him, and said in a firm but gentle voice, "Look at me. If I can face the enemy, so can you." Something in her eyes, a mixture of kindness and invincible strength, calmed him instantly. The soldier later said that he would have followed her even into death because she believed in him when he did not believe in himself. Her ability to inspire was her greatest weapon. Even in her final battle, when she fought against overwhelming odds, those who saw her remembered how her presence seemed to slow time itself. One moment she was at the front lines, sword flashing like silver lightning. The next moment she was rescuing a wounded comrade, pulling him to safety. Her courage made others brave. Soldiers who had been ready to surrender found themselves gripping their weapons tighter, determined to fight as long as she lived. After her death, the British captured Gwalior, but they could not capture her legacy. It lived in every person who had ever felt the sting of injustice. It lived in every child who grew up learning her name. It lived in every freedom fighter who took up arms to challenge colonial rule. Her story became a thread that wove itself into the fabric of India's fight for independence. In the decades that followed, India changed rapidly. Railways expanded, new political movements emerged, voices demanding freedom became louder. And through all of this, the memory of Rani Lakshmibai remained constant, a guiding light that reminded people that courage comes from conviction, not circumstance. Even today, more than a century later, her story continues to inspire millions. Statues of her stand proudly in cities, showing her on horseback, sword raised toward the sky. Schools teach her name with pride. Films, poems, songs, and books celebrate her life. The very streets of Jhansi feel alive with her spirit. Yet the most powerful tribute to her legacy is not made of stone or metal. It lies in the hearts of people who believe in fighting for what is right, no matter how impossible the odds may seem. Her story reminds us that greatness is not something one is born with. It is forged in moments of choice, when one stands up against injustice, when one speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves, when one refuses to surrender even when standing alone. Rani Lakshmibai's life was a testament to this truth.